Hello and happy Thursday. You know, I've been saying happy Tuesday all day. Like I missed a couple days in the week. Hello, Nikki. Sir, thank you. So happy you guys could be here today. Well, I will go ahead and get started. So first, of course, as always, I want to greet you, lovely people, and tell you thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for desiring to participate in the discussion about setting boundaries. I know the last couple of sessions, I kind of forgot to introduce myself, forgetting that every time I have to introduce myself. But I am Dr. Nicole J., your confidence coach, helping you to discover ways to increase your confidence so that you can go after the life that you desire and you deserve. So let me ask you, do you feel like you deserve the life you desire? Do you feel like, or not even do you feel like, do you know that regardless of your background, regardless of your history, your family tree, regardless of your financial status, that you still deserve the life you desire? Do you know that? Because that's my job today. That's my job really every day, is to help you discover that about yourself and to help you to find ways to make that happen for you. So today, as I mentioned, we're talking about setting boundaries, and this will probably be a two-part discussion because today we'll be talking about boundaries in relationships, like romantic relationships, but next week we'll definitely be discussing boundaries on your job, boundaries in your family. And both of those things are important because we know that both family and bosses and coworkers, they know how to cross boundaries like nobody's business, right? So definitely, as always, feel free to comment, feel free to share, and feel free to share your perspective. Anything that we're talking about, any ideas, anything that's on your heart pertaining to this topic. I want this to be a talk. I want this to be a discussion, especially because I know that not only are you growing, I'm also growing. I'm also learning. And I'm also always open to some things that I may not have experienced or have experience with. Because though I am the person holding the conversation, I am not necessarily the know-all on every single topic we talk about. So on the topic of setting boundaries, every single relationship has to have boundaries. If that's not obvious or that's not something that you do on a regular basis, it's time to start. So when we talk about boundaries, that really is setting a limit or a dividing line between things. So the limit would be things that you can tolerate, things that you need in order for you to feel fulfilled, in order for you to get what you need out of the relationship. Now, that's not necessarily you asking the other person for something that's impossible. That's you asking for something to help you feel secure and confident in yourself and in the relationship. So they're not a set. If we're going to start off talking about what boundaries are not, they're not a set of do's and don'ts and rules for your relationship. They're not that. And if you feel like someone has a laundry list of things that they don't want you to do, that they don't like about you, that they don't like about what you do, that, my love, is not a boundary. It's a relationship that you should not be in. I'm just going to say it very plainly. There's no other way to say that. If someone is trying to control you with lists of do's and don'ts, that relationship is not for you. Because you should be able to feel free about yourself. You should be able to feel confident enough in yourself and in your abilities and in your character that somebody doesn't need to give you a list of rules in order to love you, in order to have the relationship with you, in order to feel secure in the relationship with you. I hope that makes sense. So 3 things when we talk about things that setting boundaries, what it is not. So it's not a method of controlling another person. We talked about not having the list of do's and don'ts. So if someone is saying to you, if you don't do X, then I'm leaving. Or if you're not, it's different when you're not fulfilling a need for them. That's not a boundary. That's a requirement. You know, if you need them to be present in the relationship, that's different from them saying to you, if you don't get rid of this friend, then I will leave. If the friend is not threatening to your relationship and it's just a method of them controlling, that's not a healthy boundary. So we move on to the second one. What setting boundaries is not. It's not a way to manipulate somebody. And there are some people that do this faithfully, that will set rules and set limits and set boundaries just so that they can say they have the last word, that they're able to decide how someone else moves. I mentioned friends just now. That's definitely a popular boundary that people have. I want you to myself. If you don't get rid of these friends, I'm leaving. And for someone who's not secure in themselves, sometimes we oblige that because we are not secure enough in ourselves to say, I still want, these other relationships are valuable enough to me that I'm going to continue in those relationships, even because I recognize that this is manipulation. So that's not what we want when we talk about setting boundaries either, right? And I hope that as I'm talking through these things, if you recognize any of these characteristics or any of these boundaries that you've heard or you've seen or someone has even tried to impose on you, hopefully you've been able to recognize them. And sometimes it's a matter of a conversation. Most people don't really desire to manipulate you when it comes to boundaries. It really is a mechanism for them to feel secure. But when you notice that something is manipulating or someone is trying to manipulate you, hopefully you guys are, depending on the length and the strength of your relationship, able to have the conversation to say, that doesn't work for me. Let's try something else. So the third thing is, boundaries are not a way to punish your significant other if they don't do something you want. Anytime you have the word punishment in a relationship, it's not healthy, right? And that's the important part about learning boundaries, is learning what's healthy and what's not healthy. Thank you, James. We deserve better, no matter how much they manipulate us. And that's true. That's true, because nobody deserves to be in a relationship where they feel like they can't be themselves, or that they're being second guessed, or they're being told that they can't do something that would either hurt them to not do or would cut them off from other people that they love if they didn't do it. Right? Exactly, James. Somebody tells you they're going to punish you for something. That's something that you tell a kid, your own punishment. I'm an adult. You're going to punish me by doing what? Sorry, that was my little sassy self. But at the end of the day, punishment is not healthy in any form as an adult in a relationship. So, for instance, your significant other says, you stayed out past the time that we talked about, I'm taking your car keys. You're going to do what? You're taking the car keys to my car? Like, that's not healthy. Not only that, there are some people that actually succumb to that because they value that relationship over their personal freedom. And so for those of you who are just joining us, I just kind of went over 3 things that setting boundaries is not. It's not a list of do's and don'ts. Well, technically I went over 4. It's not a list of do's and don'ts. It's not manipulation. It's not a set of rules. And it's definitely not punishment. It's not a type of punishment that you give if someone doesn't do what you want them to do. So I hope that makes sense to everybody. So your boundary should not make the other person feel bad about themselves or feel like they can't thrive in the relationship. So I think we talked about this last time when we talked about intentions, that when you're in a relationship, when you set your intention for what you want to get out of the relationship, it should be aligned on both sides. So if someone is just looking for somebody else to control, that's not a relationship that's equal. And that's not one that can grow and thrive. And then, so boundaries should be discussed in the beginning of the relationship and even throughout the relationship, especially if somebody feels like their needs are not being met, especially if somebody feels like their boundaries haven't been respected. And so some examples of boundaries, and of course, these are just a few, when you're in a relationship with someone. It could be celibacy until marriage. There's some people that have that boundary. And if someone gave you that and said, hey, I really want this to work out, if that's not something you can handle, that's the time to say it. Not make them feel bad months down the road because they made a decision and you can't handle it. And vice versa. That could be you saying that's what you want and the other person agrees and they can't handle it. It's a discussion that has to continue to happen throughout the relationship. Another boundary could be friendships with exes. That's an interesting boundary because that's one of those things that sometimes you feel like a relationship is beneficial to you and your significant other may feel threatened by that relationship. And yes, that's more of a reflection on them than it is on you. But if it's a relationship that you value with your significant other and you feel like maintaining your friendship with those exes, it's not necessarily the best idea to keep that friendship so close to you, especially when it's with the opposite sex, which if it's an ex, it could be or it could not be. That's your business. Wait a second. James said, what if the box is trash? The box could be trash. But if they're celibate, you wouldn't know. You would not know. You'll have to find out when you find out. So then, so friendships with exes, sometimes that can be a point of contention between people in a relationship. And you just have to be able to decide if that's something that you want to deal with. If that boundary is placed on you, if they tell you, if your significant other says, hey, I can't deal with the fact that you're still close with your exes. You have to decide if you're okay. No, James, you don't get a refund if you wait. So James said, if you wait all that time and the box is trash, do you get a refund if they say they're celibate till marriage? That's not the way that works, my love. You got what you got. A refund boundary does not exist. I'm sorry. So then another possible boundary that some people have is friendships just with the opposite sex, period. And that could be a way that somebody feels threatened in a relationship that, for me as a woman, if most of my friends are guys, that might be a problem. It may or may not. It just really depends on how secure the person that I'm dating is. But also it depends on our communication. Hey, I may have friends, but we don't go out by ourselves. So boundaries, there can be boundaries within a boundary, if you guys are following me, right? So either way, as long as you're communicating with your significant other and you guys are getting on the same page, that way it's not a level of manipulation. I just want you all to myself. I still have friends. I still have a life. I had one before you. I have one with you. If this doesn't work, I have one after you. All right. So then another one could be curfew. So this is an interesting one to me, right? Because we're grown, right? So a curfew isn't necessary, but is it respectful? Yes. Yes, it's respectful. If you're hanging out with your guys or hanging out with your girls and it's a Saturday night and you and your partner, or your partner says, hey, I'm not okay with you being out past 2. Anybody ever had that? No. There are not, sometimes it's a difficult thing if you're used to being independent and you're used to being single and you're used to doing what you want to do, then that might be a problem. That may not be a boundary that you can adhere to. But on the same token, you would want them to respect you if that was your request. If you were asking, hey, I know that it gets crazy after a certain time. I would much rather if you were home with me at that time. And I'll say this too, for the most part, when we talk about boundaries, as long as it's not like a hard, like whatever, I don't care what you say, this is not happening. Anytime there's a discussion and both parties have the ability and the time to express themselves, that's when it's a healthy boundary. Because sometimes there can be compromises that are made in those times, right? So if you are saying to your significant other, like, hey, okay, I get it. You're not comfortable with me staying out till 3. Can I do like 2:30? Okay, and let me clarify. It's not asking for permission. It's getting on the same page. So I know some of us are like, oh no, I'm not asking for permission. I'm grown. Cool, you are grown. They're not your parent. You're in control of your own faculties. But still having that talk helps them to feel more secure about not only what you're doing, but the fact that you understand where they're coming from. And then the other one that for me totally hits home is activities with your kids. If you have children and you're in a relationship with a significant other, there are boundaries for where they can take your kids and what they can do with your kids. Does that make sense? So especially if they're not the parent. If they are the other parent, then that's, that one can be a moot point. But if the person that you're with is not the parent of your kid or kids, then there are boundaries that have to be set in that. Because at the end of the day, if you say, I don't want my kids going to see scary movies, and they just decide, hey, she's not going to know. How's she going to know where I took the kids? I'm going to know. I'm going to find out you took my kids. But if someone gives you boundaries and tells you they're not comfortable with certain things going on with their kids, you have to respect that, and vice versa. They have to respect that if you give those boundaries. James said, man, treat it like a job. If it's 3 a.m. and no call, no show, go ahead and stay where you at, player. I don't know, James. I don't know. I'm not really with you on that. I ain't go with you with that trip. On the no call, no show, I definitely wouldn't say stay where you're at. It still is going to be a discussion. And I still would feel safer knowing that you're home. Because at the end of the day, for most people that have those types of boundaries, it's more so a security and safety situation. I'm sure at some point all of us have been out late at night like that, and we know that crazy things can happen at 2 and 3 a.m. At 10 o'clock p.m. too, but definitely in the morning when people have had too much to drink, people who drink and drive, just all kinds of things that could be happening, right? So for the most part, it's not you didn't come home, like, I'm not trying to hear it. It's, no, I just was concerned. I was concerned and I wanted to make sure you were with me safe rather than out in the streets where something possibly could happen to you. I hope that brought some clarity to you, James. But so that's a few examples of boundaries in your relationships. However, there are a few with your friendships as well. What? James said, if you ain't hurt or in jail, nah, I don't need an explanation. Okay. On that one, James, I'm going to say to each his own. Okay. And I say that really just because I don't know what your history has been with that. I don't know what your experience has been with someone just not coming, back home at a decent hour. And maybe they were, somewhere they shouldn't have been, with people they shouldn't have been with. I don't know. That might have been your experience. So I can understand where you're coming from. But from the perspective that I'm giving today, it really is about care. And when you have the discussion out of love and out of care for the other person, then it's more of, we just need to work through this, rather than, oh, nah, keep doing what you're doing then, since you big boss. Because that doesn't grow us. That doesn't help us to grow together. So for friends, a couple of things that are important when it comes to boundaries is access to your significant other. So if my best friend, who is a female, has my partner's number, or knows where my partner works, and I'm saying this not because your friends can't be trusted necessarily, but just because whatever you have, you want to protect it. And you want to do what makes sense. Unless it's an emergency, you really don't need my significant other's phone number. You don't need my partner's phone number. Unless you are planning something for me, you don't really need their phone number. You don't really need their address. You don't really need to show up at the house unannounced when I'm not there and my significant other is there, right? So that's definitely boundaries that should be established very early on in your friendships. And that's important because we often become so trusting in our friendships, and we already know that not everybody wants what's best for us. Not everybody wants good for us. And to be honest, I'm not a person who's always looking at somebody with a side eye saying they have to get me. That's not it. I'm really somebody that gives people the benefit of the doubt. That's not always the best option, but that's me, right? So that is a red flag. You show up unannounced. I don't know you're coming. I don't know you're there, but he or she is there, and that's not okay, friend. So those boundaries have to be set early on, and it's a discussion that should be had before the situation happens. Like, unfortunately, we think that some things just are automatic. Your friends should just know not to be calling your significant other's phone at 11:30 at night. They should know that. But it could still happen, and you didn't have the discussion. Why? James, I will say you are the comic relief for today. You get the award for that. So he said, why is your best friend bringing your man lunch? Exactly. That's crossing a boundary, 100%. And then also access or information about your relationship. All your friends, even your closest ones, should not know all of your business about your relationship. They shouldn't. They shouldn't know all about your sex life, if it's existent. They shouldn't know all about, any arguments that you have. Now, yes, we all have a go-to for that, a friend that's like, we talk about everything. But as far as telling them everything, some things are made to be just between you and your partner, and that's it. You don't have to broadcast it. They don't have to be up on game on everything that's happening, every argument, every disagreement, every time he left out the house, every time you left out the house. That's not necessary. And so if we don't establish those boundaries, then we'll find that our friends think that they are privy to access, unlimited access. Who should have unlimited access to our relationships? Nobody. Nobody. And especially unless it's discussed. We get back to that phrase again, discussing between partners what is allowable, what is okay, and knowing that those things can change throughout the relationship. What you feel is okay now may not be okay 6 months from now, when you start seeing things that don't sit right with you, or when you start feeling, uncomfortable. It's time to have the discussion again. Hey, you know what? We used to be cool with so-and-so sleeping over here on the couch if she drank too much. Unfortunately, we're going to have to drive her to a hotel from this point forward because I'm not comfortable. Or we're going to have to call her so-and-so friend so she can sleep over there. I'm not comfortable. Just talk about it. And so, kind of as I wrap up here, some things when it comes to what boundaries do look like. We talked about communication and just talking things out. That's how you realize where somebody's heart is in setting a boundary, rather than feeling like it's just rules or just do's and don'ts or just them trying to control you or the situation. Communication is so important in every relationship, friendships, on your job, your romantic relationships, in your family. The things have to be talked about, because assuming all that does, we know what the saying is, but assuming all that does is put you in position to misunderstand. Just ask, just talk about it. The other thing about what boundaries looks like is listening. So I can talk to you till I'm blue in the face about how I feel when your friends come over. I don't feel comfortable. And you're like, man, that's been my homie for years, you know. But if I'm telling you I don't feel comfortable, it's not because I just don't want you to have friends. So you have to be a listener as well as a communicator. Communication is not just about saying what's on your mind and your heart. It's also about listening to your partner. And then also about honesty. Definitely. I don't want to say the real saying, Rome. Don't do that. Fine. When you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. We know the saying. Thank you. So then we talk about honesty. You want to be upfront and direct about whatever it is you're feeling, whatever boundaries you have. If you say, oh, I'm okay with that, and then next you know you guys are arguing because they took you at your word, that's not okay. So along with communicating, along with listening, you want to be honest about what you feel, what you're thinking, and what you're telling your partner. And then the last thing is that you want to be respectful. You may not know that there are some things that your partner went through that have caused them to put up guards and have certain boundaries. So just dismissing them, just dismissing what they're concerned about, just dismissing what they're trying to tell you is not okay, especially when they're wanting to talk to you about it. It's different if they're just locked down and you can't get anything out of them, nothing. But when they're feeling open enough to you to have that, to share those concerns, to share those boundaries, no, I'm not blushing. Anything else? To share those boundaries, you want to make sure you're respectful about that. And so, as always, I hope that you guys got something that you can take away from this discussion we had today. I appreciate your participation. I appreciate every comment, every heart, every like. Hopefully you guys are sharing this with people that you know, and even having these discussions with your friends, with your significant other. And then please DM me and let me know how it went, because I love hearing other perspectives. I love hearing how other people process this information, how you see boundaries, how you see boundaries in your own personal relationships. And of course, if you have not yet purchased my book, go ahead to boldvibesllc.com and buy it for your sister, your mom, your friend, your cousin, yourself. But thank you guys again. I look forward to seeing y'all again on Tuesday, where we'll be talking about setting boundaries as far as your job and as far as your family is concerned. Love you guys. Have a great night.